David Stark from WatcherPass.com. And all right, we've made it. This is the third Fear Street movie, Fear Street Part 3, 1666. And, if you follow the series, this is the third movie. Each series has gone in the past, and this is the origin of the entire, all the craziness that's happened in Shadyside. And if you'll notice, this is 1666. Did you get the hint? Did you get the numbers? The year has 666 in it because this is where you really get to see the evil that has that has gripped this town and that has caused all these murders. So I should start saying this film is being released on Netflix on July 16th, 2021. It's the third in a 3-movie series event that started on July 2nd, so just 2 weeks ago, with Fear Street Part 1, 1994. The next movie, Fear Street Part 2, 1978, was released in July 9th, 2021. And now the third movie, Fear Street Part 3, 1666, is being released July 16th, 2021. So it's been kind of a whirlwind. It's an interesting approach by Netflix. I really liked it because I liked that you had, the film's all connected and each one kind of ended in a cliffhanger. And rather than like in the Marvel series where you've got a cliffhanger that then you have to wait a year or even like the Harry Potter series where you kind of knew that certain things would happen and you had to wait a year and a half between each movie. In this one, you had to wait a week. So it was frustrating that they ended in a cliffhanger, but you knew that it was only a week and then the next one would come out. So I really like that. It's kind of interesting that this movie is being released now rather than Halloween. This feels like the perfect 3-movie series to be released during Halloween. You got like, beginning of October, middle of October, and then, right before Halloween, you've got the last one. But I do also understand, I get kind of where this is coming from. Some of the films have like a summer vibe to them, especially in 1978. So I can see why it's being released now. And maybe also they just, they wanted to have something fun and scary to be released. And, hey, if you want to release content early, that's great. So this is a good point to tell you that there will be spoilers in this review. I'm going to be talking about the story. Basically, I'm going to talk about the film for a little bit, talk about 3 things I liked, 3 things I didn't like, and then, kind of discuss the ending just briefly. So there will be spoilers. If you haven't seen the film, go check it out. Check out the first 2 because they all build on each other. So if you haven't seen the first 2, you really don't want to see the third because they're, everything, characters that we meet in the first 2 movies are relevant here. The story kind of builds. They're not they can be self-contained stories, but you really want to have everything. And this one especially, you really need the previous movies before you see this one. So go watch it, come back, watch this video review, and I guess if you don't care about spoilers, you don't really care as much, feel free to keep watching, but you've been warned. So Fear Street Part 3, 1666 has Dina kind of projecting back in time. You'll remember in 1994, the killer was unleashed and they kind of learned about the witch's curse and this like series of serial killers that has been haunting or terrorizing this town. It's like a cycle. Every once in a while you'll get a new serial killer that just has runs rampant, murders multiple people, and then just kind of goes into Shadyside lore. So 1994, we kind of introduced to the predicament and found out that that there was maybe a witch that was behind it all. In 1978, we learned more about this, the serial killer rampage, and also learned where that witch was buried. In 1666, we really kind of discover the origin of it. The film has Dina traveling kind of back in time, like she goes in and experiences the story from the witch's perspective. So you really get to see what happened. It's set in like a Puritan kind of town, like it's very pilgrim-esque. It's you've got log cabins, you've got a very religious town, you've got a witchcraft fear. So it's very like Salem witch trials type of experience. And you learn, more about what's happened. And it's interesting because it reuses the actors from the first movie, but kind of both movies. It reuses them in this story and in these characters. So you've got, they're not playing those characters, but they're playing characters from this time period, and you see the familiar faces. It's an interesting tactic. I liked it because you could see these characters and you knew their faces already. There's some things I didn't love about it. I'll go into that later, but it was an interesting choice. And you really learn about, what happened, what started this all. And in the end, you do find out, the mystery. You find out what happened and why this town is cursed. I'll go into that in the spoiler section. So also, let me go with the three things I liked. And then, I should also mention, and after the 1666 part, it goes back into 1994, where you've got, all the people you met in the first movie trying to stop this rampage so it doesn't happen again. So, three things I liked about this film. The first thing is the story's wrapped up and there are connections with the films. Like the films all connect as you would expect from a three-part series, but they do have hooks in each film that kind of come to light in this last movie. And it does wrap up the story. There are revelations that happen. There's, there's a connection between all the films. You do get to know what happens, and the film does end, and it does kind of answer the questions that you've had. So I did like that about this. Sometimes you'll have a film that doesn't, you'll have a three-part series where maybe the third film is the weakest, or that maybe the third film doesn't really answer anything or tries to set up a future movie. Now, this one, the three films are self-contained. They're a story, and they kind of come to conclusion in this last movie. The second thing I liked is that this film does take place half in the Puritan time, which is a very different feeling time. It has a very different feel. It feels more. I'm trying to think. Like it feels more like if you saw The Witch, which was a fantastic movie and one that's kind of a similar feel with this family kind of out in the wilderness and this very religious family worried about satanic possession. The 1666 part does feel like that. I mean, it's not as intense as The Witch. It's not as kind of psychological as The Witch, but it has a lot of those aspects. It's got a town that's kind of gripped with fear. It's got some very odd behavior. It's got some rebellious kids. So it has a very, very different type of movie than the previous ones. And that's one thing I think has been a very interesting, and something I've enjoyed about this movie series is that each film feels very different. 1994 felt like like a 90s horror film. 1978 felt like an 80s slasher, 70s or 80s slasher. 1666 feels like a very different movie. It doesn't feel like a movie that was set very far back, right? It feels like a more modern movie, but it has a very different, sinister, dramatic feeling than the previous two movies. And then when you shift to 1994, you've got this characters moving, you got a similar feel to the first film. You've got similar characters. The movie is kind of two stories set in one film. And so that, I liked that. I liked that the first part felt very different and the second part was kind of a return to form. And that leads me to the third part. I loved that when the movie shifted to 1994, the style returned. You had, the 90s music, you had the neon color, you had the great fashions and the characters. All that came flowing back when it switched down to 1994. And that was nice because that was one of the things I really loved about the first film is it felt like a 90s style, Scream type movie. And so this, you get that back again. You get that feeling again. And it's partway through. So you do have, this interesting, dramatic, darker side of it. But then you do have this, fun. I don't want to say fun because the movie, I mean, it's fun and it is bright, but you are dealing with serial killer or you are dealing with supernatural killers. So, but you do have that kind of return to form in 1994. So three things I didn't love. The first, the 1666 part. Now, this is kind of a weighted statement because, I liked that the movie was very different. I liked that each film was very different. But, one of the things I really loved about this movie is that the first two parts had a very distinct style and felt like, distinct genres in the horror timeline. The 1666 part kind of loses a lot of that style, and it's not a fault of the movie. It's just kind of a fault of the time period it's set in. You don't have great music. You don't have, like noticeable iconic imagery. You don't have bright colors because of the time period it's set in. And so that just kind of left me wanting more. And thankfully, when you get to 1994, that style returns. A lot of the aspects I love about the film return. But you are left in 1666 for a very long time because it establishes the story, and that makes sense. But it's a drier, darker, less dynamic part of the movie, and so that just wasn't something I loved. The next thing that I didn't love, and I'll get into this in the ending part, is it feels like some of the questions weren't answered. I mean, the film does answer a lot of questions. It tells you who is doing this. It tells you why. It gives you kind of the progression of what has happened. I just felt like there were a few things that were left unanswered. Although the film does wrap up a lot, it does answer a lot of, the burning questions, the main questions of the story are answered. So you're not going to feel unfulfilled. And the last thing I didn't love is that Fear Street 1994 and 1978 had really, really great practical effects, like really good slasher type practical effects. There were hints of CG in it, but they weren't like as prevalent. But in 1666, the CG has a much larger role, especially when you start getting into like the darkness in this town. There's a scene, there's a beating heart of darkness in this town, and that is pure CG. And so it was just much more noticeable this time around. I think because it had a more prominent role, because you spent a little bit of time there. So, you know, CG is kind of a pet peeve of mine. If it's done really well, it's great. If it's not done that well, it's very distracting. And in this one, it was distracting. Now, thankfully, it's not a huge part, but it plays a more prominent role in this film, and that's why I noticed it more than I had in the previous movies. So, you know, now let's get into the ending. So the ending of the film, okay, let me just briefly describe the ending. So, what you learn is that the Good family, which in 1994 you've got Sheriff Good is kind of the main good character, and in 1978 I believe it's Mayor Good, who is Sheriff Good, who's a boy in 1978. His father is the main good character. And what you find out is that going back all the way to 1666, the Good family has been, the patriarch, the patriarch of the Good family made a deal with the devil to essentially scratch a name that would be a sacrifice, and then that person would go crazy, murder a bunch of people. That blood from that murder would feed the devil, and then the devil would reward the Good family with good fortunes, right? A little on the nose, right? The Good family had good fortunes. And so it had been continuing. The head of that family would do that every year, and that's why there was, or every generation, and that's why there was this consistent murder spree in Shadyside. There was a little bit of a class aspect too, because the Good families all lived in Sunnyside, or Sunnyvale, and all the murders happened in Shadyside. And I think that's partly just because of who they picked and the proximity. But it does lead to this, like, they live in this sheltered area and then kind of are killing the people in the poorer, less well-off side in order to sustain them. But so what you find is that Sheriff Good scratched the original name in 1994 into the wall, and that's why the skull mask killer went crazy, seemed like he was possessed, killed a bunch of people. That's why, and that's been happening. That's why it's been happening consistently. So what the friends do, they lure the killers into the mall, lock them up, spray them with Sam's blood, because they're still like out to get Sam's blood. Or I guess maybe this time it's Dina's blood. I think at this point it's Dina's blood. And so they spray them with Dina's blood, because they're still out to get them, and then have those killers all kind of go crazy. Sheriff Good comes into this time, comes to investigate, because there's stories of murder, and I think he also wants to silence the people. And then he gets targeted because they spray him with some blood. So he gets targeted. He runs away. He pursues Dina. They get into a fight. Dina eventually kills Sheriff Good, and poof, the curse is broken. The serial killers disappear, and everything is good in Sunnyvale and Shadyside. So, the thing I didn't love is that it felt like almost like a Scooby-Doo ending. Like, so Sheriff Good doesn't play a prominent role in 1984. He's someone that kind of knows what's happening. He knows at least the story. And in 1978, he plays a main character, but again, not one that you kind of expected to be this murderer. And the Good family itself, they're kind of like, they're mentioned, but they're not really prominent. So it felt like kind of a Scooby-Doo ending, where you're like unmasking the killer, and like, oh, it was Sheriff Good all along. And I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you kids and your, magical time traveling skills, where you can go back in time and see what happened. Like, it felt like a ending that kind of came out of nowhere. Now, it did answer the question and it did explain it. So, I can't fault it too much, but it did feel like an ending that was just completely out of left field. And it also felt like there were a few things that weren't tied up. Like, I think I just missed it, but I didn't understand why they had to go after Sam and then Dina, because according to the pact, all that had to happen was you scratch a name in, that person went on a rampage, then they were done, and the curse was dormant until the next good patriarch scratched the name into the wall, and then it would begin again, and then the fortunes would happen again. So I wasn't sure why Sam and then Dina were targeted. I think maybe Sam's blood got on there because they were by the tree where the witch was hung. But again, like, it didn't really fit with the curse and the timeline. I mean, it would be a pretty uninteresting movie if they didn't go after Sam. So I get that, but I was I'm wondering if maybe there was another way they could have described it. And then also there were some weird quirks at the end, like they leave, in the end, Sam and Dina leave the good household. They go, kind of end up there as they're trying to end the curse, and their neighbor gets into a car, backs up, and just gets smashed. I think maybe that was Mayor Good. It wasn't really explained. I think it was Mayor Good, and I think he was just killed. But it just felt like random. Like, why did he all of a sudden get killed? Maybe that's part of it. Maybe the devil in this case is trying to clean up loose ends or trying to punish them because they didn't fulfill his sacrifice. I'm not sure. That just felt random. And then at the end, there's also this technological reference. This person mentions like some technology that clearly didn't exist in 1994. So I'm not sure if like maybe she's time traveling back, or if they're just trying to like it just, again, it felt odd. Like, I didn't understand, because the film does a really good job staying in the timelines. And so at the end of 1994, she mentions like an SSD, which is not a technology that was there in 1994. At least I'm pretty sure, because I think in 1994 I had like a 500 megabyte hard drive in my computer, and I was really excited about that. So an SSD clearly didn't exist. So there's these random happenings at the end. And maybe they're tied in with the books. Maybe they're tied in with the source material. Maybe they were telegraphed earlier. But again, it just felt like these things kind of came out of nowhere. And then the film also ends in kind of a cliffhanger. Like, so the book that kind of explained the ritual for how to make a deal with the devil that the goods used in 1666, and then each good patriarch progeny used every generation, is stolen at the end of the film. All you see is the book, and then you see a hand grab it, and then boo, like, horror ending, and so that leads on kind of a cliffhanger. So, but it's a horror movie, it kind of fits with the timeline. I'll forgive that. But these random things that happen, and the Scooby-Doo kind of ending, it didn't sit as well as I thought it would. I really enjoyed this series. Let me just say that right now. I really enjoyed 1994. 1978 was not as strong as 1994, but I liked a lot of the things it did. I liked the style of it and the way that it felt different. I think this film was probably the weakest of the three. I think on my review I gave it a rent it, because it didn't have as strong of a overall style and as strong of a character as the first two films. But that being said, if you've watched the first two, you're going to watch this anyways, and you're not going to watch this as a self-contained story. So I think in the end you'll probably watch this if you stick with the movies. But I think this film by itself is the weakest of the three. But that being said, I really did enjoy this series. It's on Netflix. You can binge it, if you want, in one great 6-hour chunk. And I also loved that because it's on Netflix, they released them sequentially in very short order, so that you didn't have this like hanging cliffhanger for a very long time. So in the end, Fear Street Part 3 1666 does resolve the story, does answer a lot of questions, has some weird quirks, and it's not as strong as the other movies. But if you've gotten this far in the series, you're gonna watch this movie. You're gonna need to know the answers. So I think ultimately you'll watch it, although even though it is the weakest of the three. It's available on Netflix June 16th 2021. along with the other two movies that are already available now. So check it out. Get your answers answered. Let me know what you think. Let me know if I missed something. I probably did, right? Like, I'm only human. I missed something, but let me know what you thought. Let me know what you thought about the movie and some of these unanswered questions. And thank you so much for watching. If you liked this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. And if you want to see any more video reviews, interviews, unboxing videos, there's plenty more content on this channel. And thank you so much for watching.